Suhani was my classmate at Stanford University's Graduate School of Business, and she is a social entrepreneur. In my opinion, she is the social entrepreneur. The slums of Mumbai seems to be very, very far away from this part of the world, but you will see and you will feel in reality the problems, the challenges, and the solutions are so close. Please give a really warm welcome to my hero, Suhani Jalota. So, we will start with the basics, Suhani, because social entrepreneurship and social enterprise as a concept is not necessarily known in this part of the world. If a capitalist, if a hardcore capitalist who thinks that business and entrepreneurship is only about competition and victory, will ask you, what nonsense is social entrepreneurship? You're either social, NGO, non-profit, or an entrepreneur, a for-profit, hardcore capitalist. What will you answer me?
First, I want to say thank you so much for having me here. Thank you, all of you, for coming for this. It really means a lot. I've never been to this part of the world, so it's definitely a very different atmosphere and context that we're talking about as well. Social entrepreneurship it's understood very differently by different people, as you very clearly mentioned. A capitalist would have a very different take on it. My view on what a social enterprise really is, it's any organization, whether it's a business, for-profit, non-profit, that's doing good. So the social aspect comes from this, the fact that you have to create some kind of social impact. The enterprise side of it is just that it has to run effectively and efficiently and be able to deliver in a way that a business does. So a lot of it is actually in the way that an enterprise operates. So a non-profit that is operating like a business and is delivering social impact is also a social enterprise.
How did you learn about these concepts? From where you come from, actually, it's a pretty rare thing. So how did you start?
It's rare in that it's new. So it's just becoming a field. In fact, any kind of interdisciplinary fields are becoming more of a thing, but they were not of the past. So when we have the public sector, the private sector, and then the civil sector, these were three very independent sectors. Now we're seeing that there's a convergence between all of these different sectors. And so for public and private, there's the public-private partnerships, which have becoming more and more common. We have crony capitalism coming in, where politics is now playing in as well. In the same way, a social enterprise is the bringing together of the two sectors, the civil society as well as the private sector. And in some ways, in fact, the way to scale a social enterprise is often thought of through the public sector now as well. So involving all three, the civil society, the private sector, and the public sector, to create massive national level change. And that's really the way to go.
So from theory, which sounds nice, of course, coming back to the ground, what are you exactly doing?
I run this organization called the Myna Mahila Foundation. Myna is the bird that speaks a lot, and we want women, and Mahila means woman. So essentially, we've created this organization where women can talk about the issues they're most afraid to discuss aloud as a means of breaking the taboo and stigma that's associated with menstrual hygiene, domestic violence, sexual assault, anything that a woman shouldn't feel afraid to talk about, but she is. And we want her to stand up for herself and fight for herself, knowing that this is only her right, and that this is something that she should stand up for in her family and in her community as well. So the organization founded officially in 2015, but I've been working in these slum communities in Mumbai since I was about 15 years old. And to give you a context of what Mumbai slums are, actually, and what they're like, so we have 24 million people living in Mumbai and in the outskirts of Mumbai city.
Which is 2.5 size of Hungary,
Yeah, it is. And half of that population, so in fact close to 12 to 13 million people, live in slums, which is one of the highest percentages of any city in the world. So only Rio de Janeiro compares, that's in Brazil. So when you have such a large part of the population living in slums, and they're the ones actually building the cities, it becomes a really important segment for us to focus on. Unfortunately, that entire segment is unrecognized by the government. So it's non-notified, so it's all illegal. And they're all residing on 8% of the land. So when I say half of the population is living there, half of the population, meaning only the people are living there, but they're on 8% of the land, and most of that land now is actually marshy. And because Mumbai is such a constrained water-constrained city, for it to grow, it's very difficult for it to grow in land space, and more of the marshy land is now being taken up as housing by these slum dwellers. So it's a very constrained environment where it's a nightmare for the government to provide any type of basic amenities. So whether from electricity to water to a simple thing like a toilet, the government doesn't recognize these areas. So how can you provide legal amenities to illegal settlements? And in this context, you don't even have a governing body. So in a rural area, you actually have a rural governing structure. You have a head of a village government, and then they're reporting to somebody else in the government. In a slum, you don't have any such governing structure either. So the kind of economy that we work in is very informal. Most of the people here are unemployed or underemployed. And in majority of the cases, men are not working at all. It's just the women. So if you have all the men being drunk and having I told
you that this would be similar to what we have.
You have 5, 6 children in every house, and then you have these women who have the sole responsibility to feed their families. They have to look for employment themselves. And yet, when women are not able to get this employment, their entire families often suffer. When we founded the organization, Myna Mahila Foundation, we realized that we wanted to employ these women locally, giving them financial sustainability so that they can actually earn income for their families. And in doing that, they can also break the taboos associated with them not having to be able to speak up openly about anything that they can.
What was the drive behind your decision? So you established this as a student. I think it was around your first university year, something like that, right?
Yeah. The drive is and will always be the stories of the women on the ground. As a 15-year-old, when you see and hear of stories when women are often crying in front of you, as well as like standing up in ways that you would have never imagined. They've seen their children die in front of their eyes when they used to live on railway tracks or on pavements on roads, seen their children die from being hit by cars on the road. And they have suffered, women and their own children, their own girls, being harassed mentally as well as sexually while on the way walking to a public toilet. When you think about the kind of situation that they're in, and yet somehow they're surviving, and yet somehow they are still trying to work for others in the community, you realize that this is just, there's so much of potential here, and there's so much of lost potential that this is really the key to a prospering India.
Are you a lone wolf, or you had a great company, group of friends who helped you?
India is going through this wave of where the youth really wants to get involved in creating social change. I mean, it's kind of split. So, half of the youth really wants to leave the country. They think it's a helpless situation. With the whole political regime now, which is very nationalist, people often think that we're becoming less and less secular as a nation, so less and less accepting of other cultures and ethnicities and religions. And on the other side, you actually have people that are really interested in creating social change, joining politics, joining business. And I've been very fortunate at Myna to have had such an excellent team, most of whom actually come from the slum communities themselves. And these girls, we've had cases where these girls really come from areas where they couldn't even talk about periods or pads or about themselves openly. They would cover their faces with a burqa. When they were talking about even their names, they couldn't say in front of any men. And now these girls are basically going door to door, marching on the streets on Menstrual Hygiene Day on the 28th of May this year. We just had a whole group of hundreds of girls on the streets, on microphones, talking about how period blood is not bad blood. And these are the same girls who used to cover their faces to not even say their name in front of anyone before.
If I remember correctly, to the pictures you have shown me about your projects and activities, you're actually leading a group of much older people, older than you.
Yes.
Isn't that difficult? Are they accepting you as a reader? And if yes, which I think the case is, how did you manage this?
So we work with 16-year-olds to 55, 60-year-olds. And for the older women that we employ, a lot of them look at me as their younger daughter or as somebody that they would want their daughter to be around. I have definitely initially found it very, very challenging to work with them in that I didn't want to ever give them any instructions. I didn't want to tell them to do anything in a certain way because I felt that they would always know better. They have experience that I don't have, and I, in fact, want to learn from them instead. And I think we've somehow grown together. So it's not a dynamic where anyone is above anybody because we all have different things to contribute. In fact, I'm not the decision maker. The decision maker are the women on the ground because they know best what their problems are and they know best what their solutions are as well. All I'm doing is helping bridge the gap with resources that they might not currently have. And I think the team also looks at it that way. And so when they realize that they're also in a power of making decisions and that it's on them too, that ownership lies with all of us. And so that hierarchy hasn't really come in. So I think that's been very, very helpful for us. And also the dynamic, personally, it is very much like I'm their daughter and they're like my mother. So they feed me really good food and we have a lot of fun together. So it's not really this kind of dynamic that you normally imagine.
You have been invited by the Queen of Great Britain. CNN covered your organization. You are pretty much a well-known personality in the social entrepreneurship scene, I think globally. And you are studying at Stanford, which is a great university, but still one of the most elitist institutions of the world. It's a bubble.
Yes.
So don't you feel that spending years far away from Mumbai, your original ground of mission, being in this pretty much the elitist layer of the global population, is dangerous for a mission-driven person like you? You spend a lot of time out of your traditional space of action, which is, for me, very important, very interesting. And for some, it can be seen as an ambivalent thing.
I agree with you that it's very important to be at the site of action. But I also think that it's more about who you are rather than the context that you're in and what you make of it. And so while being on action is very important, especially in the long run, and that's where I want to be. In the short run, when I'm really thinking about how do we maximize MENA's impact and how do we reach as many women as possible, it's really about getting the right resources, which a lot of the Silicon Valley, California area actually has, and be able to connect it to areas that actually don't have that kind of expertise as well as the resources in terms of mentoring, in terms of building the business side of things. So when we started MENA, we started off it as a nonprofit organization that is creating social impact. And the business element was something that was lacking and something that we're still trying to build on and really trying to develop, because to make anything at that level and working with a vulnerable population that cannot pay you for their services, you have to look for some other payer. And in that process, while building that business, I'm finding that the resources at Stanford are actually very helpful in that sense. It's also in terms of it being a dangerous environment, meaning it could influence you and change the way you're thinking. That is really on the type of person that you are, and if you will let that change you. And I think I did my undergrad in the US as well, and I moved back to India, and I was there for a few years. And I felt that if anything, that had actually enhanced my experience, because going back, I was able to bring back a lot of different learnings and the way people worked abroad to a society that lacked a lot of that professionalism or that way of thinking openly and broadly. In India, often when you go to school, you're just doing academics and you're told to just exceed in your classes and excel in your classes, get really good grades and marks. That is how they judge you. And Indians are also very good at engineering, at taking decisions and being the robot. But the person who's creating the creative robots, or the person who's actually the CEO of companies, who's communicating, who's talking about things, is selling things, that's not an Indian. We've had Sundar Pichai and Satya Nadella who have kind of proved that wrong to some extent. But those are really very, very some small anomalies from the whole majority of the way the system actually works in India. And so to create that kind of broad-minded thinking and the perspective and really think a little bit more about what leadership communication means and how can we get more women, particularly in our case, in these leadership roles and be able to communicate better, we need these kinds of ideas coming from outside that can help change that.
Do you have opponents in your local ground?
a lot, and a lot of them tend to be religious leaders, and a lot of them tend to be men as well as older women as well. They often tell us that we're polluting their wives' minds because suddenly they're now thinking about a way of living that they never did. And now if a woman is going and asking her husband for permission to be able to send her daughter to school, she normally would not have stood up for her daughter before, which she is now doing that. She's now standing up and asking her husband whether she can get money to go and buy sanitary napkins for herself that initially she would not have. In such scenarios, the husbands they shut the doors on our faces, they come to our office, again drunk, and being like, you dare not touch her ever again, and then we have to gang up, and then we have to really try to protect our own women. We have religious leaders. When we get some opposition from some of them, we try to get support from some of the other religious leaders who can help talk to each other as well and resolve the issues. We work with the police very closely because we have to. The areas that we work in are often areas that even the police can't patrol because they're scared for their own life. And so when we are trying to go into these very narrow pathways where there's no light coming in, there's no street lamp, nothing, right? Because these are, again, all illegal areas, and trying to find women there, A, who need employment, or B, who need the access to sanitary napkin products. In either case, we really need police people to be guiding us and standing by our side as well.
So the state is actually supporting you?
The police definitely, these are local police officers, especially the women police officers in that area, who are very, very supportive of the work we do.
Okay, but they are state bureaucrats.
Yes,
so
exactly.
The things are improving in a sense because the state guarantees some kind of support, very important physical support for a service like yours.
Yes, for sure. I mean, our central government, our prime minister cares about sanitary napkins now. Our prime minister cares about toilets now, and he's been very vocal about this. It's excellent in generating awareness. Where it is not as useful is when it actually comes down to on the ground what is really happening about what he said on stage and on Independence Day, when he's making all these really outlandish remarks and talking about how every single Indian today should have a toilet to use, and that we are actually open defecation free in India. So open defecation is when you're not using a toilet, you're just openly defecating on the streets. Like, none of this is true at all. But it's just because a lot of these statements, and there is this government and state center support, yet on the ground it often doesn't manifest itself in the ways that we'd want it to. So it's still on the local officials to take it upon themselves as something. If they want to support, then they can. And if not, there's nobody holding them against it either.
For me, you seem to be very wise and experienced in such a young age, which is very untypical. I'm curious if anything can surprise you after these years you spent actively on the ground. What was the latest big surprise for you in this whole enterprise, in this whole challenge?
I think we are surprised every day, and I don't agree with that initial statement. I don't think that I'm atypical at all in this case. A recent happening that happened just at Myna recently, where we had a 7-year-old girl be raped, murdered, and put in the water tank of our building where our office is. And this was, I mean, unheard of. We only heard about this case like after 1 or 2 days of the police basically trying to find her, and then we started getting involved in this case. And I mean, you'd expect that we should have been used to these kinds of cases, but you can't get used to something like this at all. And we, in fact, find cases of rape against minors by minors on a daily basis, 3 to 4 being registered at the police station. There are numerous others that are not even registered, right? This is the reality, and we cannot get used to it. And if we did get used to it, we would just become immune, like many of the others in the country who have just gone on to lead their lives indifferently. We just can't. We're in the midst of all of this. So I think that there's a lot of things that surprise us, and it's these kinds of things that tell us how much more urgently we need to be working faster, and we need to be thinking about how can we set up the right systems so that this doesn't happen in the first place. The way the police responds is by trying to answer what's currently already happened, but we need to stop this from happening, and that can only happen, and we think that the fundamental, like of all of these issues with domestic violence and a woman taking it, with sexual assault also hiding it, or with menstrual hygiene, is that a woman doesn't think that she is important enough or worth it to stand up for herself. She needs to understand how important she is, and the way to do that as well is to give her employment where she's having financial stability, as well as this push and this like emotional understanding that you need to have the confidence and the independence and the freedom that you've never dreamed about, that you would have never thought about. And if you have this kind of confidence and independence and freedom and money in your hands because you're financially stable, you can be independent and be able to lead your own lives and be able to stand up for yourself. You wouldn't be able to see your neighbor being harassed, but right now you're keeping quiet because you just think that's the norm.
How about funding? How you raise funds?
So the funding is always tricky, and I think in a social enterprise, the advantage is that you're also earning money yourself. So we have some amount of revenue, but the revenue is still a smaller percentage of our total budget. In India, we actually have a very good corporate social responsibility law, where every large organization has to give 2% of their profits for any kind of social cause. And the government has listed about 12 different causes in a law that they passed. And we come under the health and education bucket as well. So a lot of these really large organizations are able to fund big NGOs in India. In fact, that's one of the reasons why we have over 2 to 3 million NGOs in the country, and they're surviving because of all of this funding being available. Many of these NGOs are bogus NGOs. They're just there on paper. They're not actually doing anything on the ground. And so corporates find it difficult to identify which organizations are actually legitimate to give funding to and which ones are not. So our struggle in funding has been to basically just constantly prove our credibility and showcase that what we're doing on the ground is really worthy of your money. That money exists, there's a lot of it. It's just finding that right connect between the NGOs and the causes on the ground as well as the right social responsibility.
Do you think your model and the basic idea is scalable?
Right.
How do you think about the future of this? Is it a global network?
So 1% of India's population is about 12 to 13 million people. So when we think about scale, we're really thinking about, I mean, if we can saturate Mumbai slums, that would be scale for us too right now. But we definitely think in terms of our future long-term vision, this is not something that is, it's not a local problem, it's a global problem. And because it's a global problem, it's a need everywhere, and it's something that we can easily scale with this kind of a setup. What this would require, though, is a lot more time and a lot better understanding of the different tailored scenarios. Mumbai is very different from Delhi. Delhi is where we're starting in the next few months, and it's a completely different. Delhi's the capital in India, but it's such a different just cultural context even, because it's North Indians, and North Indians have a very different way of functioning and doing business and even trusting people. So there we are finding it difficult to find the right people that we can trust and who can trust us in ways that we can start this there as well. So yes, we think that in terms of providing the products as well as the way that we're providing education at the doorstep, that's a scalable model. Manufacturing, on the other hand, is not. Manufacturing at the low-cost level that we are is not a self-sustaining thing, and it constantly needs donations for it to run on its own. So while manufacturing on its own can't scale, we could scale the distribution and education aspects.
So I have a feeling that we just had a discussion with the future Prime Minister of India.
No.
And
oh my God.
I'm curious about whether you have ambitions on it. So do you are planning to play some political role in the future? Because it seems to be very logical for you.
Would you consider it in Hungary? No, I wouldn't lie. I think I've definitely thought about politics in the long run, but it's just not something that, the way it works in India, it's, I guess it's like that in a lot of countries as well. It's extremely dirty. It's just, I think it's, we have politicians without any qualifications at all, and so I think the fact that I am even getting a PhD is disqualifying me from politics in India. So I think in many ways it just is, it's just a very different scenario. They just released a new cabinet in India, and I think the people that are in positions of power for various sectors have almost nothing to do with their sectors, and they're not looking for people that necessarily want to develop the nation in XYZ sector to be in the government, I think, today. Though the intention is definitely that we need to develop India and make it into a global economic power, that it will become anyway. I don't think that we need a certain type of government in power because of the rising middle class and because of the democracy that India really is. We're very confident, I think, in the country that we will rise to a power where we will be able to reach a lot of people's potential that we initially had not. We've seen poverty rates drop. We've seen that women have progressed a lot, no matter what, there's still a lot of work that still needs to be done. A lot of progress has been made in health. A lot of progress has been made in education. At the same time, we have some of the worst health indicators and education indicators still. And a lot of that also happens to do with a function of just the population size, and that, we have the highest number of HIV-infected people in the world. But in terms of percentage, it's only 0.02. So we don't even top the list of anything in HIV rates in the world, but yet we have the highest numbers. So I think for a lot of these indicators, we have a lot of changes to make and things to improve. And politics needs some more young people to be involved and engaged, but I don't think today is the right time.
So guys, let's start some social enterprise. And Suhani, you just made Brain Bar, I think, more relevant than it was. Thank you so much.
Oh, no. Thank you so much.